What if I told you that the 12 apostles were not just companions of a master, but rather living expressions of 12 forces that dwell within you? What if, behind each name, each story, there was an energetic key capable of unlocking hidden parts of your soul? For centuries, spiritual traditions have conveyed secrets in symbols, archetypes, and numbers. And among all the numbers that echo in our spiritual history, the number 12 pulses with a special resonance. It is more than a convenient grouping. It's a mystical mirror of the totality of the human being. The Bible by itself does not deliver everything explicitly. Jesus did not choose 12 men by chance. The choice was symbolic, almost mathematical in its spiritual precision. 12 is the number of divine order, of perfect structure, the 12 signs of the zodiac, the 12 tribes of Israel, the 12 months of the year, the 12 hours of the day and night. Wherever we look at it in the great traditions of the world, from Egypt to Tibet, from Kabbalah to Christianity, the number 12 appears as a code. But what is really being encoded? Imagine the human soul as a multifaceted crystal, reflecting 12 forms of light, 12 ways of feeling, deciding, loving, erring, doubting, and awakening. And now, picture Jesus as a master of consciousness, gathering around him these 12 living faces of the human soul, each with its own frequency, its own inner voice, its contradictions and potentials. This is not spiritual fiction. It's an invitation to rediscover oneself. In the esoteric tradition, each apostle represents an essential archetype of the human experience. This is not about historical idolatry, but symbolic reflection. Peter, the impulsive; John, the loving; Thomas, the skeptic; Judas, the necessary rebel. Each of them echoes something that at some point has stirred within you. You've hesitated like Thomas. You've betrayed yourself like Judas. You've loved deeply like John. You've been afraid to be who you are, like Peter. And by recognizing these internal voices, we begin to see that the gospel is not just a sacred story, but a psychological map of the soul's journey. This view is not new. Ancient Christian mystics, Gnostics, Kabbalah scholars, and contemporary researchers have already suggested that the structure of the 12 is more than a narrative. In the Gospel of Thomas, a Gnostic text excluded from the official canon, Jesus does not order his disciples to simply follow the truth. He invites them to become the truth. And how does one become the truth? By recognizing all internal voices, integrating them, not denying any part of one's being. It is from this perspective that the 12 cease to be merely historical characters and become living spiritual codes. Furthermore, sacred geometry provides us with significant clues. If you draw a circle and mark it with 12 equidistant points, you will form a perfect mandala, a representation of the cosmos. The center of this circle would be the Christ consciousness, the 12 emanations around it, the facets of the soul, the apostles, each one revolving around the center, like planets around the sun. That's why in so many ancient religions, the number 12 has always been present. It represents the energetic structure of an evolving soul. But this discovery is not comfortable. Recognizing that you carry within you all these frequencies, including betrayal, doubt, fear, can be frightening. Most of us prefer to think that we are only light, only virtue, only goodness. However, Jesus, as a master of truth, never avoided the shadow. He faced it head-on. He did not expel Judas. He did not ridicule Thomas. He kept them in the circle because he understood that all parts are necessary for redemption. And what is redemption, if not the act of reintegrating everything that has been denied? There is also a deep connection between the apostles and the energy centers of the human body, the chakras. Some scholars draw parallels between the qualities of the disciples and the vibrations of these centers. Peter, linked to the solar plexus and power; John, to the heart and love; Thomas, to the frontal and spiritual vision. This is no coincidence. They are layers upon layers of symbols converging on the same truth. Jesus was forming a collective spiritual body, a mirror of the complete human soul. The real question that this video poses is not about whether Jesus existed or not, or whether the apostles were real or symbolic. The question is, Do you recognize these 12 forces within you? Are you willing to listen to them? Are you ready to sit at the table with all of them, as Jesus did? Because as long as they are ignored, you will continue to be divided, fragmented, confused. But when they are recognized and honored, something begins to align. The soul finds harmony. In the authentic spiritual journey, there are no shortcuts. And the code of the 12 voices is like an internal manual for evolution. Understanding them is naming your own fears and virtues. It's knowing when Peter is trying to take command out of pride, when John is asking for more tenderness, when Judas whispers sabotage, when James shouts courage. Each moment of life, each dilemma, is a stage where one or more of these voices are manifesting. Wisdom lies in knowing how to listen to them without being dominated by any. And it is precisely for this reason that this series begins here. Because in order for you to navigate through the next chapters, exploring each of these frequencies in depth, you need to look at the whole circle. You need to see the 12 as mirrors, not as distant figures from the story, but as intimate aspects of your own being. Jesus did not choose the most perfect, he chose the most human, and it is in this humanity that divinity begins to be born. Most people know Peter as the first leader of the church, the rock upon which Jesus said he would build his community. But behind this solid image lies a complex, vibrant, and deeply human story. Peter is the apostle of wavering courage, of the impulse that stumbles, of the leadership that fears being seen. He represents that inner voice that wants to do the right thing, but has not yet freed itself from the ties of ego and doubt. And for that very reason, he becomes one of the most powerful reflections of what it is to try to grow spiritually while still being full of contradictions. The original name of Peter was Simon. The change to Peter, which in Greek means stone, was not just any switch. It was a calling, a summons for Simon to become something solid, a foundation, an anchor. But how can one become a firm stone when inside everything is still fear and fluctuation? It's this tension that makes Peter so fascinating. He represents the struggle between the desire to be strong and the reality of still being vulnerable. How many times have you felt this? Wished to be firm, decisive, unshakable, and in the next moment, found yourself hesitating, denying, running from yourself? Peter is the voice of leadership still in training. He speaks loudly, acts quickly, and takes the initiative. When Jesus walks on water, it's Peter who jumps from the boat first, an act of uncommon courage. But seconds later, he sinks. The faith that drives him also abandons him. Why? Because his leadership was still based on the excitement of emotion, not on the stability of consciousness. This is more common than it seems. Many of us throw ourselves into decisions, relationships, projects guided by noble impulses, but without internal preparation. And when the waves come, we sink. Peter experiences this, and that's why he teaches us so much. One of the most emblematic moments in its history occurs on the night Jesus is arrested. Peter, full of promises, asserts that he will never abandon him, but hours later, he denies him 3 times before the rooster crows. This act is often treated as betrayal, but it is, in fact, the perfect symbol of human frailty in the face of fear. Peter didn't want to betray. He wanted to protect his image, his security, his body. He succumbed to the impulse of self-preservation. And who hasn't done that? Who hasn't denied something they loved to avoid pain, judgment, exposure? It is at this point that Peter becomes universal. He is not just the leader of the apostles. He is the voice within you that wants to take the lead but fears failure. That wants to lead with love but still slips in pride. That wants to protect but hides. This voice should not be silenced. It should be listened to with compassion because it reveals where we still need to consolidate within ourselves. True courage is not the absence of fear. It is the decision to move forward even when trembling. Peter trembled, and yet he walked. After the resurrection, Jesus appears again and asks Peter 3 times, "Do you love me?" It's not revenge, it's healing. It's as if each question undoes one of the previous denials. an invitation to reconcile with oneself. Peter, who fell, now rises again, but in a different way, more humble, more aware, less impulsive. This transition is one of the most beautiful in the New Testament, and it represents the initiation of the human soul into true leadership, the one that does not come from the ego, but from embraced vulnerability. In Jungian psychology, Peter could be associated with the ego in transition. He still wants to control, but starts to realize that control is not power. He learns, often the hard way, that to guide is not to dominate, but to serve. It's at this point that many of us stagnate in life, when we think that to lead is to be unbeatable, and not to allow our own imperfection to teach us. Peter is a master in this learning process. His failure does not define him. His courage to continue, indeed, does. On an energetic level, Peter carries the vibration of the solar plexus, the center of personal power. It's where we feel the urge to assert ourselves in the world, to decide, to act. But if this center is unbalanced, we act with arrogance or fear disguised as courage. Peter's journey is a lesson in how to purify this energy. He moves from reactivity to conscious action, from impulse to wisdom, from pride to surrender. Each of us is somewhere in this process. In today's world, this frequency manifests itself in surprising ways. When you feel the urge to lead a group, change a path, protect someone, make a difficult decision, it's the voice of Peter whispering inside you. But if at the same time fear of making a mistake arises, the desire to please everyone, the apprehension of exposing yourself, it's Peter in his denial phase. This voice can be healed, not silenced, not suppressed, but welcomed and guided. The more you understand this internal movement, the more your power becomes reliable, calm, stable. Peter also teaches us that making mistakes does not disqualify us. On the contrary, it is through making mistakes that we discover the areas where our soul still needs light. The most beautiful part is that Jesus never gave up on Peter. Even after the denial, the fear, the hesitation, he reaffirms, "Feed my sheep." The Master sees beyond the failure. He sees the potential. And that's what we should learn to do with ourselves. Look at our failures not as an end, but as a beginning. From them, we build the stone upon which our new consciousness can flourish. Peter's voice is the first frequency that manifests in the awakening soul. It comes before all others because it represents the initial impulse. I want to change. I want to be something more. But at the same time, it brings along the fear of the unknown. This dilemma between desire and apprehension is what marks the first steps of every transformation, and that's why Peter is the first to be called by Jesus. He represents the starting point, the brave and confused heart that is still learning to trust in the unseen. Finally, understanding Peter's frequency is learning to trust the process. It's realizing that true leadership begins with humility, that the most powerful strength comes from an exposed heart, and that falling is not failing, it's rehearsal for the flight. In you, Peter lives. When you hesitate, when you promise and then fear, when you make mistakes and still insist on continuing, Peter is there. And like him, you too can be rebuilt, strengthened, and one day become the firm rock on which others will lean. In every circle where authority exists, there is always a voice that softens, a heart that listens before speaking. In the group of the 12 apostles, that voice was John's. Referred to in the scriptures as the beloved disciple, he does not appear as the strongest, nor as the most eloquent, but there is something in him that makes him indispensable. John sees what others do not perceive. While Peter speaks, John feels. While Thomas questions, John welcomes. And this sensitivity is not weakness. It is refined spiritual strength. John represents the frequency of intuitive love, the kind that doesn't need to prove anything because it already knows, without rational explanations. He is the archetype of deep empathy, of direct connection with the divine heart. His love is not possessive nor attached. It is pure presence. That's why, at the Last Supper, it is he who rests his head on Jesus' chest. This seemingly simple gesture reveals an intimacy with the Master that goes beyond affection. It's vibrational harmony. John was in tune with the Christ essence, capturing what no other disciple could hear. In the spiritual history of humanity, there have always been those who embodied this frequency. The mystics, Rumi, Teresa of Avila, St. John of the Cross, Francis of Assisi, all of them were touched by this energy of John, the love that transcends form, dogma, religion, the love that dissolves the barriers of the self. And the most surprising thing is to realize that this frequency is not outside of you. It lives in your soul, latent, waiting to be recognized. Whenever you feel an inexplicable compassion, a love that asks for nothing in return, an intuition that everything is connected, John is there. John is also the one who remains. While all the other apostles flee at the time of the crucifixion, it is he who stays at the foot of the cross, beside Mary. This is not a detail. This is a symbol. In the darkest moment of the journey, the only frequency that withstands is love. Not superficial love, but love rooted in the soul. The silent presence of John is the image of the soul that does not give up, even when everything seems lost. The soul that stays, that supports, that loves beyond pain. There is something deeply feminine about John's energy, and this is not about gender, but about spiritual polarity. He is receptive, sensitive, inward-facing. While others act, he contemplates. While others argue, he listens. For this very reason, the mystical tradition has always associated him with the heart, and in the human body, it is in the heart chakra that we feel this vibration. John's love cleanses, heals, transforms. He does not impose, does not invade, does not demand. He simply is, and by being, he transforms everything around him. Interestingly, John is also the author of the most distinct gospel among the four. While the others talk about miracles and parables, John begins with, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God." He doesn't narrate, he contemplates. His text is a mystical poem. There's no concern with chronology, but with essence. John speaks of the light, the Word, eternal life, as if touching invisible realities. This difference in approach reveals that he didn't see Jesus merely as a man. He perceived him as consciousness. And this perception is accessible to all of us. Intuitive love doesn't need logic nor explanations. It recognizes, it intuits, it sees from within. When you feel that there's something beyond appearance, when you perceive another's pain even without words, when you love without reason, you are vibrating in John. And the more you activate this frequency, the more reality begins to expand. You start to see through a new lens, a lens that doesn't judge, doesn't compare, doesn't separate, a lens that unites. But beware, this frequency, being so subtle, also runs the risk of being ignored or mistaken for fragility. In a world that values action, reason, strength, and visibility, John might seem weak, but he is in fact the essential link. Without love, power becomes tyranny. Without intuition, faith turns into fanaticism. Without compassion, truth transforms into violence. John is the invisible glue that binds the other frequencies in harmony. Without him, the circle of the 12 disintegrates into ego and competition. Another striking point in John's story is the fact that he is the only apostle who does not suffer a violent martyrdom. He lives until old age, exiled on the island of Patmos, where he writes the Apocalypse. This symbolic detail shows that true love transcends destruction. It survives. It endures. It is reborn. The soul that loves deeply never dies. It transforms into light. John's love is a seed of eternity planted in the now. And when you allow this love to work in your life, you also begin to transcend time and matter. In times of conflict, John teaches us that real strength is love that doesn't need to win. It's the love that embraces, that sustains, that lights up the darkness without trying to forcibly extinguish it. It's the love that sees the other as an extension of one's own being. When Jesus on the cross looks at Mary and John and says, "Behold your son, behold your mother," He is consecrating this frequency as a bridge between all beings. John starts to take care of Mary. Love becomes a bond, a family, a path. Finally, activating John's frequency is a challenge for those who grew up believing that to love is to lose oneself, or that intuition is an illusion. But when you allow yourself to listen to this inner voice, which loves without fear and feels beyond words, you discover that there is a higher intelligence guiding you. John invites us to open our hearts, not as a gesture of weakness, but as the beginning of a force that moves worlds. And this love is what is missing in many decisions, in many leaders, in many lives. John is the silent presence that transforms without making a fuss. And you can be that presence. You can activate this frequency in your daily life, in your dialogues, in your relationships, in the way you look at yourself. Because deep down, love is the original language of the soul. And that's why, even centuries later, the beloved disciple continues to speak within us, whenever we are ready to listen with the heart. For centuries, the name Thomas has been almost exclusively associated with disbelief. Thomas, the doubter. That figure who, after Jesus' resurrection, declared that he would only believe if he could touch the Master's wounds with his own fingers. This gesture, which to many sounded like spiritual weakness, actually reveals one of the most refined expressions of consciousness in search of truth, honest doubt. Not the doubt that paralyzes, but the one that purifies, the one that deconstructs illusions so that only the essential remains. Thomas represents that voice within us that is not satisfied with pretty words or rehearsed affirmations. He is the frequency of deep discernment, of faith that needs to be born from real experience. This is one of the most important voices within any genuine spiritual process. Because without it, we run the risk of blindly following beliefs, gurus, dogmas, and traditions without ever touching the truth with our own soul's hands. Thomas's doubt is, in fact, a faith in gestation, a faith that refuses to be feigned. The very name Thomas carries hidden meanings. In Aramaic, Toma means twin, and this invites us to ponder, what is dual in Thomas? What is mirrored? The answer might be surprising. In Thomas, we see the reflection of a soul torn between the desire to believe and the demand to see, between intuition and reason, between trust and skepticism. All of us, at some point in our journey, experience this conflict, and what we do with it determines whether we move towards conscious faith or sink into automatic denial. It's common to hear that faith is believing without seeing. But is that enough? Mature faith is not an escape from doubt, but a journey through it. True spirituality begins when we stop repeating ready-made formulas and start questioning reality deeply. Thomas did exactly that. He didn't doubt out of vanity or pride. He asked to feel, to verify. He wanted to touch the truth, not to invalidate it, but to surrender to it without reservation. This gesture is of brutal honesty and of rare humility. Jesus' response to Thomas is one of the most revealing passages in the Gospels. Instead of condemning him, Christ invites, "Touch here, see with your own eyes, do not be unbelieving, but believing." This openness is symbolic. Jesus does not demand blind faith. He offers himself as an experience. He invites contact. He understands that humans need to experience the truth to merge with it. This attitude deconstructs any idea of an authoritarian God who demands submission. Instead, it reveals a compassionate teacher who respects each individual's inner journey. In the Gnostic Gospel attributed to Thomas, a text excluded from the official Bible but deeply spiritual, we find an even more radical view. There, Jesus does not present himself as an object of worship, but as a mirror of consciousness. He says, "The kingdom is within you and outside of you. When you know yourselves, then you will be known." This is one of the most powerful statements of hidden Christianity, and it resonates perfectly with Thomas's frequency, the pursuit of truth through self-realization, not blind obedience. Thomas does not represent just doubt, but the questioning that purifies. He is the frequency that shatters inherited beliefs and forces the soul to build, stone by stone, an authentic spirituality. Therefore, his energy is connected to the frontal chakra, the center of inner vision, rational intuition, and spiritual clarity. When we activate this center, we begin to perceive the deceptions that previously upheld our certainties. And this, although uncomfortable, is absolutely necessary. The sacred doubt is different from the arrogant denial. The former stems from a heart that yearns for truth. The latter is born from the fear of surrendering. Thomas belongs to the first group. His doubt is compassionate, and for this reason, he was transformed. Because when you don't deny what you feel, but seek answers sincerely, the universe begins to unveil its veils. The experience of truth is never imposed. It is invited, and the soul that asks with humility will always be answered. We live in an era where many are tired of ready-made answers, rigid dogmas, authoritarian religious leaders, structures that promise security but suffocate the soul. The frequency of Thomas resurfaces strongly in this time. It invites each human being to look within and ask, what really is truth for me? What do I believe in an experiential way, and not just intellectually? And this question is the beginning of spiritual maturity. Thomas was not weak. He was brave enough to not pretend a faith that had not yet been born. It's interesting to note that after meeting the resurrected Christ, Thomas makes one of the deepest declarations in the Gospels, "My Lord and my God." This is the climax of his journey. Doubt turns into recognition. Touch turns into revelation. But note, his faith is not borrowed from the other disciples. It is born from a personal, direct, intimate encounter. This is the invitation of his frequency. Do not accept truths that have not touched your heart. Seek, ask, taste, and then believe, not as one who repeats, but as one who knows. Thomas's energy is also essential in balancing the extremes of spirituality. Without it, we run the risk of falling into naivety or fanaticism. Faith without questioning is dangerous, but doubt without openness is sterile. Thomas shows us the balance point. He doesn't close his heart, but he also doesn't hand it over blindly. He investigates, he listens, he feels. This stance is especially important in today's world, where we are bombarded by information, digital gurus, and false promises of instant enlightenment. To activate the frequency of Thomas within oneself is to begin building a faith that does not depend on the external. It is to stop being a spectator of one's own spirituality and become the protagonist. And this requires courage, because sometimes when questioning, you may realize that everything you believed was fragile. But this is a blessing, not a curse, because it is only when false structures fall that the truth can flourish. And this truth will not come as thunder, it will come as silence that touches the soul. Finally, it is necessary to understand that spiritual doubt is not a sin, it is a portal that separates what was inherited from what is lived. Thomas calls you to cross this portal. He does not want you to repeat his story. He wants you to live your own, and by touching the truth with your own hands, you will discover that what seemed like a lack of faith was, in fact, your most direct path to the divine. For 2 millennia, the name Judas has been synonymous with betrayal. It became a symbol of downfall, of unforgivable error, of the corruption of the soul. But what if we're looking at him through the wrong lens? What if Judas, the apostle who delivered Jesus with a kiss, is not just the traitor, but the bearer of a vital spiritual role? What if, instead of an external enemy, he is a reflection of the part of us that breaks from the light, not out of malice, but out of confusion, pain, lack of self-love? It is with this perspective, not of judgment but of revelation, that we now delve into the frequency of Judas Iscariot. To understand Judas, one must first abandon the superficial view of the narrative. He is not a mere villain. He was one of the 12. He was chosen. He heard the same teachings. He participated in the same sacred moments. And yet, his soul took a different path. This is not by chance. It's a code. Judas represents the shadow that every human being carries, the part that feels separated, inferior, rejected, disconnected from the source. And because it feels this way, it acts against itself. not because it wants to destroy, but because it no longer knows how to love. In the field of depth psychology, Carl Jung reminds us that what is not brought to consciousness comes back as destiny. Judas is the destiny of our ignored shadow. It's the part of us that, when not looked at with compassion, makes us repeat self-sabotage. It's the internal voice that says, "You are not worthy. You will fail. You don't deserve this light." And most dangerously, it's the part that secretly resents its own light. How many times have you felt guilty for something good happening? How many times have you sabotaged a relationship, an opportunity, a chance to grow? Judas was there. And if you think this is exaggerated, just remember, Judas was not a bad man. He believed he was doing the right thing. Many scholars say that he hoped to force Jesus to react, to reveal himself as the political liberating Messiah that so many were waiting for. Judas perhaps wanted to speed up the divine plan. This is deeply symbolic. The shadow always tries to control evolution. It doesn't trust in time, in the flow, in surrender. It wants to take command, and by doing so, it precipitates the fall. But this fall has a purpose. In the Gospel of Judas, a Gnostic text discovered in 1978 and only revealed to the world in the 21st century, a new light is shed on his figure. There, it is Jesus himself who would have asked Judas to betray him. Not as punishment, but as a mission. Not as a penalty, but as a gateway. This does not negate the pain of betrayal, but it redefines his role. Judas then becomes the bearer of the wound that allows rebirth. He is the dark night that precedes the dawn, the necessary collapse that reveals what was hidden. This frequency is crucial in our inner evolution. We all have an inner Judas, and he manifests not only in grand betrayals, but in daily micro-sabotages, procrastination, self-judgment, repressed anger, addictions, destructive relationships. Every time you stray from your essence out of fear, control, resentment, this voice is active, and the more you deny it, the more power it gains behind the scenes of the psyche. Ignoring it is like closing your eyes in front of a ticking time bomb. Integrating it is disarming the mechanism. The key here is not to kill Judas. It's to listen to him. It's to understand his pain. It's to see that behind the mask of the traitor, there's a wounded child, a fragment of the soul that feels excluded from divine love. Jung said that the gold is in the shadow, and Judas shows us this with brutal clarity. Because when we face his betrayal, we are forced to see how far we are capable of going when we are disconnected from the heart. And this vision, although painful, is liberating. Without it, transformation is impossible. The spiritual journey is not just light and ecstasy. It requires traversing through the darkness with awareness. Judas is this invitation. He is the symbol of the awakening fall, of the revealing crisis, of the betrayal that exposes what was hidden. And contrary to what many think, Judas was not condemned by Jesus. There is not a single biblical record of words of hatred from the Master towards him. This, in itself, already says it all. Christ's compassion was total. Because he knew Judas was not the enemy. He was part of the plan, a bitter piece, but necessary. In alchemical symbolism, Judas represents the raw material, the spiritual lead that needs to be burned to release the gold of the soul. He is the nigredo, the dark phase of the inner transmutation process. Without it, there is no purification. Without it, the light cannot sustain. Every sincere seeker must, at some point, descend into their own inner hell. Only there, where the screams of the soul echo, is it possible to find the spark of rebirth. Judas is the guardian of that door. In the human body, this frequency connects to the basic chakra, the center of survival, guilt, and instinct. When this center is blocked, we feel fear of existing, fear of making mistakes, fear of being who we are. Judas embodies this crystallized fear. Therefore, by integrating this energy, we unlock immense life potential. The same ground where the shadow dwells is the ground where the soul's root anchors. The integrated shadow becomes strength, power, incarnated light. There is also a collective dimension to this frequency. Judas lives in the social structures that betray the human essence, systems that exploit, religions that oppress, governments that lie. But these systems only exist because there is a dormant Judas within each of us, allowing, tolerating, feeding these external shadows. Healing begins within. When you recognize your own Judas, you become lucid. And lucidity is the first step towards liberation. The final image left of Judas is that of a man who, realizing the gravity of his actions, despairs and takes his own life. This, besides being symbolic, is a warning. When the shadow is revealed without love, it collapses. Therefore, integrating Judas is not just acknowledging him, but embracing him, giving him a new place within the psyche, allowing him to redeem himself. Because true salvation is not to exclude the wounded part, but to reconcile it with the whole. When this happens, the soul becomes indivisible. And that's where Judas's final lesson lies. There is no light without shadow. There is no evolution without downfall. There is no surrender without conflict. The voice of Judas within us no longer needs to destroy. It can be heard. It can be transmuted. It can finally rest. Because even darkness, when viewed with eyes of love, becomes a path. When we think about spirituality, many still believe that it requires a total renunciation of the material world, as if the elevation of the soul depended on the contempt for physical reality, for money, for comfort. However, the path of Matthew teaches us something else, that the sacred is not separated from the world, it is hidden within it, and the mission of the awakened soul is not to reject the material, but to purify it, illuminate it, transform it. Matthew is the reflection of this reconciliation. He is the voice that invites us to see that spiritual gold is born when matter is pierced by consciousness. Matthew was a tax collector, a man of the system, connected to the Roman Empire, living a reality of calculations, interests, and collections. In the eyes of the Jews of that time, he was a traitor, an opportunist, a servant of foreign domination. But it is precisely this man, accustomed to the logic of money, whom Jesus calls to be one of his 12. This is no coincidence. It's symbolic. Jesus does not reject the world, he redeems it. And by calling Matthew, the Master is saying, even the system can be regenerated. Even money can be an instrument of light. The calling of Matthew is one of the quietest and most powerful moments in the Gospel. Jesus simply passes by him and says, "Follow me." And Matthew, without hesitation, gets up and goes. No miracles, no promises, no pressures. Just a look, just a sentence. This reveals that Matthew's soul was already prepared. Despite the outward appearance, the social role, something inside him yearned for change. And this teaches us something precious. Even when we are bound to structures that seem rigid, job, routine, beliefs, there is always a spark waiting for the right moment to break free. Matthew's frequency speaks to us directly about money, value, purpose, and because of this, it is one of the most challenging to integrate. We grow up in a culture that associates wealth with guilt or pride, and poverty with virtue or failure. But none of these polarities are true. Matter in itself is neutral. What makes it dense or luminous is the consciousness with which we touch it. Matthew lived this. He dealt with money every day, but at a certain point, he transformed this control bond into a service mission. When we write about material transmutation, we are talking about something far beyond finances. We are talking about converting dense experiences, such as ambition, attachment, vanity, into tools for evolution. We are talking about looking at our material desires honestly and asking, does this expand me or imprison me? Does it serve my soul or just my ego? The answer to these questions does not require dogma, but presence, and Matthew, with his story, offers us this mirror. The system can be converted, the ego can be transmuted, the material can serve the eternal. Not by chance, Matthew is the author of the first gospel of the New Testament, and it is in it that we find the most direct speeches of Jesus about the use of money. You cannot serve both God and money. Where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Give to Caesar what is Caesar's. These phrases reveal a subtle wisdom. The problem is not money, but servitude to money. The problem is not wealth, but the idolatry of wealth. Jesus does not ask us to flee from material things, but to be masters of them, and not their slaves. Matthew's energy is connected to the umbilical and heart chakras, centers where desire and sensitivity reside. When balanced, they allow us to manifest abundance with awareness. When distorted, they trap us in fear, scarcity, greed, or guilt. Transmuting matter is exactly that, healing the relationship with what one has, what one wants, and what one gives. It's about ceasing to see money as dirty or divine, and starting to see it as neutral energy, which amplifies who you are. With awareness, it becomes a tool of compassion. Without it, it turns into fuel for destruction. Matthew teaches us that even those most bound to the system have a soul, that even those who seem cold have a heart, that there is no place where light cannot enter. Moreover, we all have the ability to transform what once held us captive into a source of liberation. Imagine turning your job, your talent, your skill with numbers or art into a tool of healing for others. This is applied spirituality. This is what Matthew symbolizes. Another layer of this frequency is the wisdom of sacred administration. Matthew began to organize not taxes anymore, but teachings. He became the chronicler of Christ's journey. The accountant turned into the narrator of the sacred. This shows that our human abilities, organization, clarity, management, analysis, do not need to be discarded in spiritual life. They need to be consecrated. A conscious accountant can heal. An awakened entrepreneur can serve. An honest artist can elevate. Everything depends on the intention with which it is done. Matthew is the archetype of the bridge between heaven and earth. He shows that spirituality is not just in the mountains or temples, but in the everyday transactions, in the way you buy, sell, work, donate, care. Every material choice can be a prayer, every financial act can be a gesture of love, and when this happens, the world changes, because there is nothing more revolutionary than living spirituality with your feet on the ground. The voice of Matthew within you manifests whenever you feel the desire to align purpose and prosperity, whenever you feel you can live well without losing your soul, whenever you wish to transform your relationship with money, not by running away from it, but by transmuting it. This voice deserves to be heard, because the new spiritual age will not be created by ascetics disconnected from reality, but by conscious beings who walk between the world and the spirit with balance, dignity, and presence. And perhaps this is the great legacy of Matthew, to remind us that God is not only in the invisible, but also in the bank account, in the food we buy, in the roof we pay for, in the livelihood we build. That spirituality without presence in the material is just fantasy. But embodied spirituality, this indeed transforms. And when you allow yourself to live this alchemy, everything changes. Your job becomes a mission, your money becomes a flow, and your life becomes a bridge between the visible and the eternal. At the center of the human soul, there is a flame that does not go out, a quiet but persistent fire. It is the drive that makes us carry on when all seems lost, that lifts us up after falls, that insists on dreaming even after pain. This fire has many names: courage, faith, inner strength. In the apostolic tradition, this flame takes on a face: James the Greater, the warrior apostle. Not the one who battles against others, but the one who fights every day the sacred battle against his own internal limitations. James, brother of John, is always remembered as one of the closest to Jesus. He was present in the most intimate and enigmatic moments of the Master's journey, in the Transfiguration, in Gethsemane, in the silent healings. His constant presence reveals something important. James represented reliable strength, the pillar that supports, not for external shine, but for inner firmness. His energy is the archetype of the spiritual warrior, the guardian of the mission, the one who remains even when the path is arid. James was not a mystical dreamer nor a theologian. He was a fisherman, a practical man of action. This is significant. James's frequent presence is deeply linked to the ability to manifest in the world what is cultivated in the spirit. He teaches us that faith is not just a feeling, it's an attitude. It's not just contemplation, it's movement. He embodies the active presence, which builds, organizes, and protects. And for this reason, he represents practical courage, the kind that needs to be lived out in daily choices. Tradition tells us that James was the first of the apostles to suffer martyrdom, the first to give his own life for the mission. This is not by chance. He was the warrior of the cause. He understood that every true spiritual journey requires sacrifice. But here, sacrifice does not carry the weight of senseless suffering. In its Latin root, sacrum facere, it means to make sacred. James teaches us that to sanctify the ordinary, the work, the resistance, the constancy, is the true path of the soul that seeks. He is also the patron saint of walkers, pilgrims, and those seeking meaning by traversing physical and spiritual roads. The famous Way of St. James, the millennial pilgrimage to his tomb in Compostela, is not just a geographical journey. It's a reflection of the soul's journey seeking its center. Each step of this path echoes the energy of James: persistence, confidence, overcoming. He is the patron of those who do not give up, those who bleed their feet but keep going forward. This frequency is especially important in today's times. We live in an era saturated with mental stimuli, scattered desires, and instant promises. Discipline has lost its value. Consistency has been replaced by haste. Firmness has become rigidity. And that's why we need James so much. He invites us to regain the soul's rhythm, one that respects time, honors effort, and builds life on a solid foundation, not on impulses. He reminds us that the spiritual needs to be grounded. James is intimately connected to the solar plexus chakra, but also to the strength of the root, because it represents the center of personal power anchored in purpose. His energy awakens in us the compassionate warrior, the one who does not fight against others, but who protects his own mission from distraction, self-sabotage, and complacency. The symbolic sword of James is not to wound, but to cut away what no longer serves, to clear the path, to demarcate the sacred space of the soul. This frequency is also the one that sustains us in the deserts of life. When feelings fail, when faith seems absent, when fatigue arrives, James manifests there. He is the impulse that rises, that continues, that persists. He teaches us that often true spiritual progress is not in the grand mystical experiences, but in the discipline of carrying on, in the silence of doing what is right, even without applause, in the courage to repeat, to improve, to start over. The inner warrior is not the one who always wins, but the one who carries on even after defeats. And James lives this at every step of his mission. He didn't seek prominence, but was present in the backstage of faith. He didn't write gospels, but he wrote his story with actions. He shows us that the soul needs a backbone, solidity, direction. That great spiritual flights are only possible for those who build their wings with patience. In everyday life, James's voice reveals itself in moments when you need to be firm with love, when you need to protect your energy, when you feel you need to act even without certainty, when intuition has already spoken, but the world demands your presence, when it's time to leave the dream and go to the battlefield, internal or external. This voice doesn't shout, it sustains, it repeats, keep going. And sometimes that's what saves a life, a soul, a destiny. James also embodies an aspect that is seldom discussed, the humility in serving. He didn't desire recognition, he desired presence. He knew that strength doesn't need to show off. And that's why his energy is so necessary today, in a world of appearances, of vanities disguised as spirituality. James teaches us that true strength is that which is put into service. That power is what you channel to protect what is essential, not to control what is external. Finally, James is the fire of conscious action. He is the call for you to rise from meditation and act, to place your feet on the ground, your eyes on the horizon, and proceed with courage, with honor, with spirit. The warrior of the soul is not defined by armors, but by clarity of purpose. And when you activate this frequency, you discover that you are not alone. There is a force within you, ancestral, silent, untamed, that already knows the way. It just waits for you to say yes. While the Gospels illuminate in detail the journey of Peter, John, Thomas, Judas, Matthew, and James, other names emerge almost like echoes. Andrew, Philip, Bartholomew, Simon, Thaddeus, James the Less. Few dialogues, almost no highlighted action. Would they be supporting characters in the sacred story, or would they be precisely fulfilling a more hidden, more internal role, just as essential as the others, but less understood? In a spiritual mandala, even the quietest point has an indispensable function. And these silent apostles represent the internal voices that support the structure of the soul away from the stage of consciousness. Let's start with Andrew, Peter's brother. Almost always overshadowed by his more famous brother Andrew, however, was the first to follow Jesus, even before Peter. He was the one who pointed out the Messiah to his brother. This tells us a lot. Andrew represents the frequency of quiet initiation, of humility that serves as a bridge. He symbolizes that aspect of our soul that recognizes the light before it becomes popular. Andrew is the internal precursor, that intuition that discreetly nudges us onto the right path without demanding credit. How many times has a subtle feeling, a forgotten phrase, a small gesture, changed the course of your life? Andrew was there. Keep the equal sign where they are as they are separating. Next, we have Philip, the rational, the logical one. In many instances, he appears as the disciple who asks, who wants to understand, who seeks explanations. When Jesus talks about multiplying bread, it is Philip who calculates. 200 denarii would not be enough. He represents the mind that analyzes, that organizes, that doubts respectfully. But he is also the one who introduces Nathanael, Bartholomew, to Jesus. In other words, even with his rationality, Philip is a bridge between the invisible and the explainable. His frequency teaches us to integrate reason and faith, analysis and surrender. He is the voice that tries to understand, and who, when welcomed, also yields. Bartholomew, in turn, is even more mysterious. Some scholars identify him with Nathanael, who receives one of the most beautiful descriptions from Jesus. Behold, an Israelite indeed, in whom there is no deceit. Bartholomew represents the frequency of pure integrity, of a soul that does not pretend, that does not disguise. That is what it is. This inner voice is rare and essential. How many times have you tried to appear as someone you're not? How many times have you adapted your essence to fit into molds? The frequency of Bartholomew calls us back to our inner truth, to radical transparency, to the purity of being who we are without effort. And we have James the Less, son of Alphaeus. He is mentioned so infrequently that his name seems to merely echo James the Greater. But it is precisely for this reason that his energy is powerful. He represents the aspect of the soul that works behind the scenes, that doesn't appear, but supports. James the Less is the frequency of quiet stability, of the discrete strength that holds everything up. It's the soul that doesn't need to be seen, but is never absent. It's the spirit of those who serve without applause. Without this frequency, everything falls apart. Because there is no journey without a base. There is no temple without a foundation. Thaddeus, also known as Judas Thaddeus, is even more mysterious. Tradition associates him with impossible cases, the impossible made possible by silent faith. He represents the voice of persistent hope. That part of us that, even when everything seems lost, still believes, still prays, still visualizes a new path. Thaddeus's frequency is that of devotional persistence, not of fanaticism, but of serene surrender. It's the vibration of the silent prayer that sustains an entire soul. It's the flame that doesn't go out when the winds blow. Finally, Simon, the zealot, the revolutionary. The name Zealot refers to a Jewish group that advocated rebellion against Roman rule. Simon carries with him the energy of nonconformity, of intensity, of active transformation. But when he joins Jesus' group, he changes. His passion turns into service. He represents that part in us that wants to change the world, but that needs first to be healed by compassion. Simon's frequency is that of transmuting radicalism into constructive force. It's the soul that learns to fight with love. These 6 apostles, Andrew, Philip, Bartholomew, James the Less, Thaddeus, and Simon, together form a symphony of subtle yet indispensable energies. They are the internal forces that support, integrate, prepare, purify. In any journey of transformation, it's common to only pay attention to the striking experiences, but it's the silent voices that ensure the building doesn't collapse. They are the ones that keep the soul connected with its deepest purpose. And because they are less visible, these voices tend to be ignored, even by those deeply seeking spirituality. But to ignore the subtle is to cut off the root of growth. It's no coincidence that ancient masters spoke of the importance of the hidden life, of silent practice, of anonymous service. In times of exacerbated visibility, activating these frequencies is a revolutionary act. It is allowing the invisible to regain value, that the spirit returns to the simple gesture, that the sacred breathes in what no one sees. These apostles teach us that there is no weakness in going unnoticed, that there is immense strength in enduring without applause, that not every purpose requires a stage. There are missions so profound that they can only be accomplished in silence. Missions such as listening, such as supporting, such as intuiting, such as standing firm when all the spotlights go out. In the energetic body, these voices connect to the throat center, the heart, and the sacral center as they speak of internal communication, emotional surrender, and the care in building one's own story. When we listen to these voices within us, we begin to recognize our wholeness. We start to see that we don't need to shine like others. We just need to be whole, and wholeness often is invisible. True spirituality isn't just in miracles and visions, but also in small acts of faithfulness, in forgotten gestures, in silent sacrifices. These 6 apostles show us this. They are a reminder that the soul is made of layers, and each one, even the most subtle, is vital. If you've ever supported a friend in crisis without receiving thanks, if you've ever forgiven without being noticed, if you've ever contributed something that no one saw, these voices were active within you. The mystique of the invisible is a forgotten art, but by reclaiming the value of these frequencies, you become whole. Because the awakened soul does not live only from grand moments, but from consistency, integrity, and presence. The silent apostles are the mortar of the inner mandala. They do not speak loudly, but they support the whole. And when we listen to them, something sacred happens. The void is filled, the forgotten is revealed, and silence becomes voice. In every authentic spiritual tradition, there is a point where multiplicity merges into unity, where all parts that once seemed separate, conflicting, or incompatible reveal themselves as pieces of a single body, cogs of a single system, notes of the same melody. We have reached this point after listening to each of the voices of the apostles: Peter, John, Thomas, Judas, Matthew, James the Greater, Andrew, Philip, Bartholomew, James the Lesser, Thaddeus, and Simon. We now understand that none of them can be ignored, and that all of them coexist within you. You are not just the brave Peter, nor just the loving John. You are also the doubting Thomas, the self-sabotaging Judas, the transformative Matthew, the active James. And you are the silently initiating Andrew, the calculating Philip, the pure Bartholomew, the supportive James Minor, the praying Thaddeus, and the inflamed Simon. You are the entire circle, the full soul, the living mandala of the 12 expressions of the divine manifesting in the human experience. What we call apostles are not just historical figures. They are internal mirrors, vibrational archetypes that guide your path back to the center. And what is this center? The Christ, but not the Christ confined to the crucifix nor to dogma. The inner Christ, pure consciousness, the luminous point that dwells in the middle of the mandala, supporting each of the 12 frequencies without favoring any. Christ is the consciousness that allows all these voices to exist without one destroying the other. It's the essence that observes doubt without getting lost, that embraces the shadow without judging it, that drives action without anxiety, that loves without attachment. The Christ in you is the consciousness that can hear everything without getting confused and respond with wisdom. Integrating these 12 voices is the true miracle, because it's not easy. The human soul tends to favor one frequency over another. Some live in the impulsiveness of Peter, others take refuge in John and nullify themselves. Others eternally hide in the doubt of Thomas. Many deny Judas, suppress Simon, forget Thaddeus. The imbalance arises from this partiality. But fullness emerges when you recognize all these forces as legitimate. None need to be destroyed. All need to be educated, healed, led to the light of the center. This is alchemy of the soul. It's the deepest work a human being can do, unifying one's own inner home. Imagine your soul as a grand council, a circle where these 12 voices gather around the inner Christ. Each one brings a point of view, a need, an energy. Some ask for courage, others ask for rest. Some want to prove, others want to trust. Integration is not silencing these voices. It's making them converse, to listen to each other, to support each other. And this internal dialogue is the birth of true wisdom. In the zodiac symbol, the 12 signs are organized around the sun. In Solomon's temple, 12 columns supported the sacred structure. In evolutionary astrology, each house represents an area of life. The repetition of the number 12 in ancient traditions is not casual. It represents totality in motion, the wheel of life spinning in balance. You are this wheel, and when it spins in harmony, you become a clear channel for the manifestation of the sacred on earth. But attention is required, because integration does not occur simply by knowing these archetypes. It's necessary to live with them, to listen to them, to identify when they are active within you. When does Peter's denial manifest? When does Thomas's doubt impose itself? When does John's love call you to gentleness? When does James's fire ignite? When does Judas's shadow whisper? Each day of life is a new stage where these archetypes perform. The key is to be present. It's to observe with humility. It's to act with consciousness. It's to respond with compassion. This internal mandala also communicates with the energy centers of the human body. The 12 apostles can be associated with specific energy dimensions, not as a fixed system, but as guides. Peter in the solar plexus, John in the heart, Thomas in the forehead, Judas in the base, James in the root and will, and so forth. This connection shows that we are not just dealing with abstract ideas, but with living frequencies that operate in our body, in our psyche, in our spirit. To integrate is to harmonize, and to harmonize is to heal. Often, we seek outside what is already within. We follow masters, books, religions, seeking direction. But the true master is the one who teaches us to listen to our own inner multitude. Jesus did this with his disciples. He did not nullify them. He did not demand perfection. He taught them to love themselves, to walk together, to serve the same mission, even with such different personalities. This is the secret. It's not about erasing the conflict. It's about aligning everyone to the same center. And perhaps this is the hidden meaning of the Final Supper. 12 men sitting at the table with Christ in the center, a symbolic image of the awakened soul, each with their light and their shadow, their virtue and their dilemma, but all welcomed by the loving and conscious presence of Christ. When you accept your 12 voices without fear and without repression, you become this supper. You become the living temple where Christ can dwell, not as a belief but as a continuous experience. Integrating the 12 frequencies means understanding that evolution is not about becoming something you are not, but accepting and healing everything you already are. It's about making room for courage and fear, love and anger, faith and doubt. It's living in a state of presence, recognizing that each frequency has its own time to manifest. that there are moments of Peter, of John, of Judas, of Matthew, and that spiritual maturity lies in knowing how to listen to each one without clinging to any. Now the circle closes, but only to start again at a new level, because this journey never ends. Each integration paves the way for a new cycle, a new expansion. The Code of the 12 is not an end point, it's an ascending spiral, a sacred architecture that, the more it's understood, the more it elevates consciousness. You can revisit each apostle at different stages of life, because they are not static, they evolve with you, they grow with you, and deep down, they are you. So, close your eyes for a moment. Breathe. Imagine yourself in the center of your mandala. Feel the 12 presences around you. Listen to what each one has to say. And from the center, allow the Christ within you, your purest consciousness, to welcome all of them with compassion. There, in that profound silence, you will understand. There is nothing outside. Everything is here. Everything is you. Now that the 12 voices have been revealed, the circle is complete. But your journey, mind unfettered, is just beginning. If you felt that any of these frequencies spoke directly to you, Peter with his fragile courage, John with his silent love, Thomas with his sincere doubt, or even Judas with his unacknowledged pain, write in the comments, which of these voices is most active in your soul at this moment? What is it trying to teach you? Let's build together a space for sharing and conscious manifestation. Each comment you leave here is a seed sown in the collective vibrational field, and where two or more souls unite in truth, expansion is inevitable. Let's manifest this integration as one field of consciousness. Write and read the comments as if you were looking at different reflections of yourself. And if this touched you, if this video stirred something deep within, the next step of the journey awaits you right now on the screen. The Book of 33 Steps, the Hidden Map. Jesus left for enlightenment is the plunge into the next great mystery, the 33 steps left by Jesus as a hidden roadmap to enlightenment. Click now. The revelation continues, and consciousness awakens, step by step. We are one field. We are minds unfettered.